All right, we are back for our regular scheduled programming. Now that the President's Cup is over, Rob Bolton has resumed his stead as the closer of these Wednesday Talk of the Tour episodes. And Rob, we're jumping right back in. No time for a President's Cup hangover. We are headed to the Sanderson Farms Championship this week. Also, the Corn Ferry Tour finals going on this
Mhm.
week. Not sure there are betting markets for that. So we're going to focus solely on Sanderson as we get ready here. I think I want to start with the only player from the President's Cup who is in the field this week. That would be Mackenzie Hughes. I was on site in Montreal, and there's a lot of talk about what a week like that can do for people. Can it spark them to win in further weeks, especially maybe if they haven't won? Now, Mackenzie has won this tournament. He knows what it feels like to win a tournament, but kind of that idea that you get a boost after one of these weeks playing in the pressure packed scenarios that you inevitably face in team events. We've seen that from Scotty Scheffler. We've seen that from Tom Kim in the past. So what say you about that? Mackenzie Hughes coming into this week, do you find that's a bump, or do you feel like emotionally that could be tough for him to kind of respond after what was an amazing week in Canada for him?
Hey, buddy. Good to see you again. It's been a few weeks, so
It
ready to get
has.
after it here for the FedExCup Fall. 7 events in 8 weeks. As far as being a closer, I think I can still probably hit about 54 on the gun with this with this aging right arm I have here. On a good day, maybe throwing downhill with the wind. So
Right.
that appreciate the confidence. That's all that matters. Yeah, Hughes, the only President's Cupper competitor in the field. Camilo Villegas, assistant captain, also in the field this week, but shares the lowest odds to win this thing at the Sanderson Farms, which he did, as you mentioned. That was just 2 years ago. Yeah, obviously he's committed to the event. It's a 5-year exemption whenever he wants to burn it for winners into opens like this one. So Sam Burns won the previous year, not in the field, different reasons, and you can understand both ways to play or not to play this week after last week especially. Burns, of course, on the winning team up in Montreal. I think it just comes down to the guy, you know. Mackenzie Hughes has a lot of fans in terms of the fact that he goes out there and he golfs his ball. I think the fact that he's sharing the shortest odds on the board with Keith Mitchell and Maverick McNeely, as you and I are talking here, BetMGM plus 2,200, is a reflection on the board itself, but also the fact that we just saw Mackenzie Hughes play, former winner and all of that. So it's respectful from that perspective, but expectations are not that high for him. He's number 6 in my power rankings, so I'm not even into a top 5 at this point. He doesn't present as a top 5 prop most of the time anyway. Um, and this tournament, this course, it makes available all sorts of skill sets, and here we are in early October talking about it. So yeah, look, you're gonna go in to a Mackenzie Hughes market, probably targeting a top 10, but you're not going to get much for it. So when you're thinking about divvying up your units, perhaps a fraction of a unit for that, but maybe lean into something a little stronger for something else, and then look at Hughes maybe a little bit later in the fall.
Yeah, you go down the list of the tournament winners here. Luke List last year outlast a five-person playoff. Year before that, we have Mackenzie Hughes. Sam Burns is a winner here. Sergio, Sebastian Munoz, Cam Champ, Ryan Armour, just running down the list.
Yeah.
It's not one type of player here. So as you've looked into kind of the underlying data and just remembering what this tournament prioritizes, what can we pick any certain skill that really sticks out for people that have won or people that have had success here?
Good golfer. Kind of it.
Well, that'll
Like
work.
you just listed, you went deep enough into the reverse chronological order of the winners at the Country Club of Jackson there in central Mississippi to get a flavor of the winners. Now, the tournament itself has evolved from an additional event from a few years ago into its standalone status now. More FedEx Cup points, invitation into the Masters, for example. All of those things now come with it. So the field has strengthened from those old days when it was opposite the World Golf Championships event in China. But yeah, there's never been a repeat winner. There's never been a two-time winner. As you mentioned, those skill sets, they're all over the place. And the course itself, you have 2.5-inch Bermuda rough at this time of year. It's going to be in the South. It's going to be just as lush as it was 2 months ago in the heat of the summer. So no big deal there in terms of a difference. But it yields one of the stingiest fairways hit percentage of all courses all year, top 10 typically. And then greens and regulation is usually in the top half, pretty comfortably, top third type of thing. And then putting ends up being sort of a difference maker. But even then, the greens are running up to 13, and experience hasn't really mattered. We've had a bunch of first timers and first debutantes win this thing. The first 6 winners of the tournament were first time winners. None of the last 4 were. The last 3 needed at least 2 previous trips. So it's all over the place. And that's an amalgamation that any golf course, any golf tournament would love to have. It's like the Players Championship. It's like the Open Championship. I referenced it in this week's Golf Bite Insider. So we have to be careful to push all of the units into any one skill set. It's not a week to stack in DFS in terms of that angle as well. So it's just equitable, and that's one of the reasons I dig it. I don't know if it would be as compelling week after week after week, but it is this week, and we're going to really relish it for when we have it, because things will change next week with the new course, heading to Vegas after that when things change. So we have this wonderful pocket of time where we get back after it for the FedExCup Fall. It's a course that's now in its 11th time as host. There are no changes, so guys can hit the ground running back in the FedExCup Fall, but they can also find their games this week too. It's going to be a lot of compelling storylines that we don't see coming, and a couple that we do. And while it's an argument that we can make most of the time, those are the factors that are really stepping forward this week.
Yeah, and at the top of your power rankings, you have Nick Dunlap, who would fit maybe that first-timers category as we go through the history there. You start off that just by saying good golfers is where we're looking here. That would seem to be why Nick Dunlap's just number 1 for you. What kind of had you have him right at the top of the list?
Well, in full disclosure, there isn't really a go-to number 1 this week. There isn't that stand-up player. You mentioned Hughes to start. Tied for lowest odds. Dunlap's third at 2,500 plus 2,500 was Seamus Power. Again, anybody who's paid attention to golf week after week after week, these are not the guys that you're targeting at the top of the board, or for the shortest odds at least. And we're far cry from 3-digit odds. So that's where some of that equanimity comes from. Dunlap just presents most firepower. Yes, he's won twice, and he's an incredible story this year, one of the best of the year. But the fact that he committed, he's just recently won not long ago over the summer, and the fact that he's a Southern kid, like there's all sorts of good things going on there. Yes, he's not from Mississippi, he's an Alabama guy, whatever, but it's close enough. And I know the Southeast is the Southeast. He's familiar with the Bermuda Greens. We could cite all of those things. But for the top of the power rankings for this week, I'm looking for firepower, and Dunlap delivers that.
I want to go off the board, someone that's not even in your power rankings, but when you look at the betting odds, I think you mentioned he has the 3rd best odds. That's Keith Mitchell. One that, as you go through some of the horse for course type stuff, he fits some of those markers, but clearly, I know for other people, I think, oh, maybe they just forgot Keith Mitchell's in the field. Certainly, I know, Rob, you knew he was in the field. So what was it about Keith that is maybe thinking he's not going to have the week that, at least the odds makers would set him at?
Yeah, I love Keith. I've owned him several times in my season-long leagues, including this year, so it pains me to cite him as missing the cut as the wild card in the Golf Bet Insider this week. He's plus 260 when I wrote it on Tuesday, so that's quite favorable for investors. He is one of those 3 who is shortest on the board at 2,200 to win, plus 2,200 to win. But he's 0 for 4 on this course, man. 0 for 4 for a guy who's as dynamite as he is from tee to green. You'd think at some point. He is 171, and everything else is par or worse. His scoring average is not good. It's a course a little bit like Silverado that also it's indiscriminate. It can come up and bite you, and sometimes the time of the year, the guys have just finished the playoffs. Previously, it was the start of the season, so the dynamics are different. You had a class of Korn Ferry Tour graduates, so just a different mix. It's different now since the FedExCup Fall has been introduced now in its 2nd season. So we're learning a little bit about how that's going to play effect. Maybe that'll be better for him. We'll see. But he's 0 for 4. He has 2 consecutive 12th place finishes upon arrival. Yeah, the metrics are always good for Keith. That's one of the reasons I love owning him. But more for the long range than for the short term. I think he's a trap this week, and I'd be careful.
I want to pick your brain just a little bit on the fall schedule. It's a little bit more sporadic than the week in, week out PGA Tour. If someone plays great last week, is in the field this next week, we kind of know where their form's at. Right now, we've had, 2 full field PGA Tour events in the last, 2 months, just based off the playoffs. And then you get a week off, then you have Procore, then you get another week off, and then it's President's Cup. Like, it's been very sporadic for the guys that, weren't in the playoffs, weren't on the President's Cup team. So I see some of those players that have been hot in your power rankings, someone like a Patrick Fishburne, like a Patton Kizzire. I'm just wondering how you're factoring in form at this stage of the year when we're taking weeks off. It's not like the normal cadence people are going through.
Yeah, that's going to be individual to the prognosticator. And for me, I think it's almost a shame that guys find some form entering the end of the regular season, then they can't play. They could go play the Corn Ferry if they wanted. They don't. They prefer the rest, and that makes sense too. And whatever sort of injury or thing that might be bothering them, or just to go reintroduce themselves to their family, like I did in the last month. That's important too for the mental. So it's unfortunate that some of these guys have had to hit the brakes, but we keep the faith with regards to some of them. It's always golfer specific. You mentioned Patrick Fishburne, one of the dynamite rookies of the last several months. Not going to be rookie of the year unless he'd have to win a couple of times this fall to really have a chance for it. But it's out there for him to go get it. Patton Kizzire, the winner of the Pro Tour Championship. We know a little bit more about Patton. The long term is more favorable for support there. But Fishburne has been dynamic no matter where he's played. So, he's playing new places. Patton Kizzire has been playing these courses for a while. They both come in from different angles. In terms of the overall, the general philosophy, I like the guys that, have had a chance to work on their games when they haven't had to go out and be pressured to perform for their jobs. That's a good thing. So I think at the end of the day, it all neutralizes into some of the similar things that we go to week after week. We just don't have, as you said, recent results. It's sort of recent, but it's all we got. So, we think about it, we expect to learn from it, and then take it forward into next week and the week after. We put something out there, as I have for many, many years, and we roll with it. And so that's why a guy like Keith Mitchell scares me this week, despite all the factors that would lead me to believe, or lead others to believe, that he deserves to be, again, sharing the lowest odds to win this thing. Perhaps if he was younger, perhaps if he didn't already have some of that course experience that hasn't paid off. If he's 0 for 2, maybe we give him one more, but the leash is already 0 for 4. So again, it's golfer specific, and it's always been. It's a great question. It's something that we'll continue to contemplate as the FedExCup Fall gets deeper, and then we'll have more recent results. That's like a tremendous 19th hole conversation, pal. That's a great question. We could go on and on about it.
I'll take the compliment. Thanks, Rob. Two more guys I want to hit. Matt McCarty, 15th in your power rankings. If you're unfamiliar with the name, don't blame you. He spent all of the year on the Corn Ferry Tour, wins 3 times, has secured the number 1 spot, which gets him into the Players next year, the U.S. Open as well. So he's kind of accomplished everything he could set out to accomplish on the Corn Ferry Tour. So he's foregoing the final week of the Corn Ferry Tour finals and starting kind of his promotion this week at the Sanderson. It's a bit hard because we haven't seen him compete against this slate of professionals. We've seen him play really, really well in the Corn Ferry Tour. You could argue, and I would hear your argument, that he's one of the hottest golfers anywhere, and you just take the form regardless of what tour it's on. But with that unknown, how do you approach him from a betting standpoint, from a fantasy standpoint? You're obviously comfortable enough to put him 15th, but it's a bit of I'm sure, a hard one to follow because you're just not quite sure how he's going to stack up. How have you approached Matt in this first week that he's up?
The most important thing you said there is that he's been hot. The 3 wins in his last 6 starts. You're right. He doesn't have to play this week, so he's taking advantage of the membership on the PGA Tour. This is a free play. I think of Will Zalatoris during the Super Season when he ended up winning Rookie of the Year as a non-member. There were only 3 rookies that year, and he was a non-member. I loved following him, and it was arguably going to be the best year as a professional golfer because he had absolutely nothing to lose and absolutely everything to gain. And that's Matt McCarty this week, and then whenever he plays during the FedExCup Fall, he has his job. So there's McCarty sitting there thinking, well, I have nothing to lose. I'm going to go out and do this thing. I love the dynamic mentally as that. So now he can just go play and do what he's been doing so wonderfully. So expectations are high. I kind of went into the week thinking he'll be in the power ranking. Again, relative to the field this week, he belongs in the power rankings in a vacuum. But I'm going to respect the other 14 who have been out there doing it all year, who are chasing, who are more familiar potentially with the course, those sorts of regular attributes that we look at. Thought about sliding him a little bit higher, not much higher, but I figured, you know what, we'll open with him and then give him the attention that he deserves. And then if he finishes inside the top 15, or better than 15th, then that makes sense. I love guys who have this opportunity. This is the only time in his career where he'll probably have this, because if he has to go through it again, that means he'll have regressed, and that'll be a different dynamic that won't necessarily be as positive as it is right now. So it's a special time to be Matt McCarty, and I'm all in for it.
All right, last guy I want to talk about, probably the most popular guy in the field, Rickie Fowler, making his return to the PGA Tour. He's welcomed a kid in this time since it was shocking when I went and looked at it. He hasn't played since the Open. It's been, we're going on almost over 2 months now, almost 3 that we've last seen Rickie Fowler in PGA Tour competition, and it wasn't good the last time we've seen him play. And I wonder about his motivations this time of year, because he won last year in Detroit, so his card is secure. He's not worried about that top 125 bubble. He's probably in line for signature event exemptions because we know how popular of a player he is. I'm sure he would like to get there on his own number and not have to rely on them. But is this just one of those things where you kind of are in a wait and see approach with Fowler this fall, because we're unsure of the form, we're unsure of what he's shooting for? Like it's very hard to place Rickie in this, because I wouldn't be surprised if a fresh restart he's out there contending, but also if he shows some rust, misses a few cuts, that wouldn't shock me either. So are we just in a wait and see mode right now with Rickie?
I think I'd be surprised if he went out and played well this week,
All right.
especially. I like the fact that he's out there. You've already laid out in terms of his job, he's safe and all that. Just as much as it's good to be Matt McCarty right now, it's always good to be Rickie Fowler. Let's face it. So he's out there doing his thing. He's unaffected by it, at least outwardly. His balance in his life is where he wants it to be. He's 35 now, so he could be considered in his prime, but he had a really early launch in his career. So relative to him, he could be entering his post prime. We'll see. He's got 2 young kids. Like, that's a priority. So golf tends to take a back seat to that. When I looked at the board, and there he is in my other notables on the Golfbet Insider, plus 115 for a top 40. That's Rickie Fowler. That's not a misprint. So if you like Rickie Fowler, and there's a lot of people who do, myself included, and you want to be on board with him this week with an opportunity, he doesn't have to play. He could be at home with his newborn, all those sorts of things. But here he is. He's out there chasing the grind at plus money for a top 40, at least half a unit. In that instance, that's where I would get on board. Because, again, as I've said for years, some of the best experience that you have, whether it's in fantasy, whether it's in betting now, is when you attach yourself emotionally. It's just so much more rewarding. We obviously love to win. But when you pick a guy like that for a low finish, like a top 40, field's 132, it's 12 shorter than it was last year. Cut still low 65 in ties, nothing different about that. But Rickie Fowler in this field should be one of the shortest on the board, and he isn't. And he ends up being plus value for a top 40. The timing to get on board for a guy like that who has that kind of firepower that we know, despite the fact that I don't expect him to contend, I like the fact that he's plus value for the top 40. So that's where I land, and I would understand and respect anybody who thinks either way of that. But the conservative in me, understanding all the parameters, and certainly as you laid them out, I think that's where the smart money should be this week with Rickie Fowler.
We will be following it all throughout this FedExCup Fall. Rob will be here week in and week out with us. Rob, thank you so much for the time.
All right, pal. Good to see you again. Talk to you again when we talk to you.